Hey folks, it's Taylor Wood again. Uh, got another story published yesterday. Genesis, IUPUI's literary journal. That's where I go to school, but I'll be transferring out to IU pretty soon. Anyway, the story is called I Hide My Scars with Booze and Cars. Uh, it's unlike The Lonely Diner. This one really happened. What I did though was kind of combined an event that happened with one group of friends with another completely different group of friends and just kind of mashed them together even though they weren't really there. Uh, but like The Lonely Diner, this one's written in kind of my old style, kind of a Fitzgerald type thing, so I kind of explain the character at the beginning and then get into the action. I kind of like getting straight into the action nowadays, but anyway, I hide my scars with booze and cars. Oh, I gotta get in character. Okay, good. Anderson Hood had a secret. He often wished he were dead. He drank, drove fast, smoked cigars, and gambled, all in hopes of tempting death. He wanted to die, but did not have the strength to take death's hand voluntarily. Even though they call suicide the coward's way out, it takes a powerful man to take his own life, especially if he's already been fighting with all his might to simply live. Anderson loved to party, or in other words, drink himself into a stupor, which he had spent the last few months an entire summer worth doing. He was drinking to forget lost love and have fun, but mostly he drank in order to break social barriers, as he was quite shy. He also drank as a way to keep his mind off the issues that constantly ate away at his nerves. You see, Anderson Hood was a young man who cared too much. Even the smallest inconvenience would send him into a spiral of self-pity and misery for days. No matter how much he tried to turn his thoughts to positive subjects, his mind was constantly stinging with what was wrong in his life, which in his case was everything. Tonight there would be a party at his friend Matthew's apartment. The music would be loud as the whiskey flowed free like the Mississippi. As soon as Anderson heard of this party, he began to prepare himself. He showered and shaved and dressed in his Friday night best. While most kids his age dressed in casual button-ups or polos, Anderson preferred to look as dapper as possible to at least attempt to please himself. Tonight he dressed in black pinstripe slacks and a matching vest over a black silk button-up and black tie. For comfort, he wore polished loafers that were, of course, also black. To top off the ensemble, he wore a standard black fedora which also had pinstripes and his favorite aviator sunglasses. The fedora and the glasses were his trademark. If you ever saw this guy, he'd probably have a cigar in his hand and that old fedora on his head. He looked like one of those bootleggers straight out of the moving pictures. He was now dressed and ready to get tight. He drove his old crappy car to Matthew's place. Perhaps he deemed himself with this decrepit jalopy because he spent all his money on clothes and booze and cigars. Maybe he figured an old car was more likely to explode and blow him into a million pieces. Who knows? Probably he just didn't give a damn. He passed row after row of cornstalks as he drove. Anderson wanted more than anything to get out of this Midwest hell, but his car was evidence enough to show that he didn't have the money to do so. He'd always wanted to live in some place like Chicago or New York. Granted, he did live in an urban area, but it seemed that corn even grew in the cracks on the sidewalks here. When he arrived at Matthew's, he saw he was the first person there as usual. "Hi, Andy," Matthews said as he lay Anderson inside. "What do you hear?" "Nothing much, Matty boy. Where is everyone?" "Well, obviously they ain't here yet. You're always getting here quick as a blink." "Yeah, I guess I am." "Say, you got one of your famous poems tonight? You know everyone's gonna want to hear one." "Yeah, I do." Besides being a striped dresser, Anderson was also a poet, and a damn good one at that. At almost every party he was coaxed into reciting his latest poem against his will. He had to drink plenty before he was willing to actually read it, though. The crowd always loved his verse, even if he didn't. He didn't find them to be particularly interesting or skillfully crafted. This is one reason he hated reciting them. Mostly he just hated people. "How's about giving me a little preview, huh?" Matthew asked with a sly grin. "What do you say?" "I don't even want to read for everyone else, let alone just you. No." "Well, fine. How about a drink, then?" Anderson smiled. "Now you're speaking my language," he said. "Don't mind if I do." The two friends sat and talked over a whiskey as they waited for the rest to arrive. Perhaps friends isn't the best word to use. Anderson Hood was a young man with few true friends. This is not because no one liked him. On the contrary, most people found him quite endearing and humorous. He just wasn't very trusting and good at socializing. He mostly kept to himself, even in a room full of people, drinking, smoking, brooding. To Anderson, Matthew was an acquaintance, but not much of a friend, though the others seemed to love him for some reason, despite the fact that he was quite a bit younger than them. Anderson found him to be good company when no one else was around, but he could become quite irritating. His voice was high like a hummingbird's, and he dressed like a child. He was one of those center of attention types, but he always had a drink for Anderson, and Anderson could respect that. Eventually, Jack and Thad arrived. These two were best friends and could always be found together. Jack was one tall son of a bitch, so most people called him the Tree. He was good with the ladies. They all loved him, but he barely ever returned the favor. Anderson, who had trouble talking to women, talking to anyone for that matter, was pretty envious of old Jack and never understood why he didn't engage any of these broads who clearly wanted him. Thad, on the other hand, could usually be found hidden in some room with a girl doing the business. Anderson thought Thad was a real swell guy. He was very calm and always pointed out how nice a moment was. Anderson loved both of these fellas. He considered them good friends, but he was envious of the bond they shared. He knew that they thought of him as a friend in return, but he'd probably never get into their inner circle. "Look what the cat dragged in," Matthew said as Jack and Thad entered. "There he is," Thad said, and he shook Anderson's hand. Jack did the same, then they both shook Matthew's hand. "You got one of your poems tonight?" "You bet your ass he does," Matthew answered for him. "Well, let's hear it then," said Jack. "Not yet, Jackie boy," Anderson replied. He smiled and reached up to pat Jack on the back. "Give me another drink and I'll see what I can do." They all sat and drank for a while and shot the shit and played a few rounds of poker. Anderson began to feel lonely. The others were all talking about baseball as the night's game played out on the radio. Anderson didn't follow sports. In fact, besides drinking and smoking, he didn't do much of anything most guys do. He didn't chase skirt, he didn't play sports, hell, he didn't even read the morning paper. He wrote poetry and sang songs to himself all alone in his mother's home. And now he felt all alone in this home. He'd make little jokes and comments here and there, but the others would just look at him and then continue on with their own conversations. Some friends. Eventually, Stacy and Amber showed up. These broads were like Jack and Thad, always together. Stacy was a slender blonde, pretty in the face, with not too shabby a body to boot. There's not much to say about Stacy, besides her hair wasn't the only blonde thing about her, for she was quite airheaded. Amber was much more sound of mind, but a little chubby. Anderson still liked her more than Stacy, though. She was much more trustworthy and hell of a lot more intelligent. For the most part, she was a good girl. "Hey there, boys," Amber said. "What's a girl got to do to get a drink around here?" Thad perked up and said, "She's got to take a seat on this lap here." He patted his knee and winked at her. She rolled her eyes and made her way to the kitchen where the drinks were clearly displayed. Stacy loyally followed. They all sat down for another round of poker. The girls quit early in and just watched. The room was filled with a haze of cigarette and cigar smoke. "This is nice, you know," Thad stated. He was sitting out a few rounds. "All of us here having a good time and all?" Anderson nodded at him and raised his glass. Thad smiled and took a long drag from his cigarette. The girls were starting to get bored. "This is such a stupid male game," Amber complained. "What are you, one of them feminists?" Jack said jokingly. "Yeah, don't be mad just 'cause you don't know how to play right," Thad threw in. Jack laughed and Matt said, "Yeah, you just have a little woman brain. Did you hear me, Andy?" He slapped Anderson's arm. "I said she has a little woman brain." Anderson smiled but didn't say anything. "Did you hear me?" Matt repeated. "Yeah, I heard you," Anderson finally answered in annoyance. Stacy laughed and piped in. "Didn't you know, Matty? Andy never talks. He just sits by himself and smokes and pouts." The whole group laughed. This is a pretty accurate depiction of Anderson Hood. While everyone else was howling with ridicule and laughter, Anderson just sat and took it. His face became red as a tomato, but he showed no other evidence of being bothered by the comment. Inside, however, he was mortified.